Hello everyone, I'm Marine Lefort, I'm a freelance publisher and you listen to Les Voix de la Photo. Les Voix de la Photo is a podcast that gives a voice to professionals in the photo and image industry to reveal their journeys, their successes, sometimes their setbacks, and give us some advice along the way. Today this episode is in English because I'm in London with Chris Booth. Hello Chris.
Hi.
You are a London-based independent photography book publisher and curator. You began your career in 1984 with the Photo Co-op. After notable roles at Magnum Photos and Phaidon Press, you created your own publishing house in 2001 until 2011. You later led Aperture as executive director from 2011 to 2021. Firstly, thank you for welcoming into your home. During this conversation, we will explore your career and your current project. To start your discussion, could you share insights into your childhood? Were you raised among family or peers who share a love for the arts? Where did you spend your early years?
My dad's a farmer. Was a farmer. He's died. I grew up in the West Midlands. I was very rebellious. I didn't want to have anything to do with the countryside. I wanted to be in the town. From a very early age, there was a local block of flats in the local town about 5 miles away, and I told everybody I was going to live on the top floor of that block of flats. I think I was probably an obnoxious teenager, quite radical. I studied English literature, which was, it's kind of nothing and everything. You got a chance to consider, it embraces history, arts, psychology. It embraces everything. So I enjoyed that very much. Didn't really have a sense of where to take things. I suppose it's relevant that I ended up in South Africa and worked in Durban in a children's home for a year in a after-school projects that I raised money to do. And
at what age?
I was 18, but I was very influenced by that. So my university years were particularly characterized by political engagement, the anti-apartheid movement. I never actually signed up to the Socialist Worker Students Organization, but I went to all the meetings. I was involved in kind of gay liberation at that time, and I had no thought at that point of getting into art or photography.
And did you know what you wanted to do?
I wanted to work in the media. I had sort of vague ideas about journalism, filmmaking, but they were not clear at all. And when clarity came, so I managed to get a job as a production runner for a filmmaking outfit. It was a corporate communications company, really. It wasn't very interesting. The work that they were doing, I was the projectionist, and I looked after kind of 12 projector tape slideshows and showed the rushes when a film was being made, etc., as well as did whatever jobs needed doing. But I applied for a job about a year after I'd been working there as, I'm not even sure what it was called, coordinator or administrator of the Photo Co-op. And what appealed to me was that it was a co-op, first and foremost, that it was an activist group campaigning in London. London was a very polarized, volatile place, not a million miles from the way things are today, not in exactly the same places, but there was this giant battle between Margaret Thatcher and Ken Livingstone going on. Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, by British standards up to that point, very right wing. And Ken Livingstone he wasn't the mayor of London, he was the leader of the Greater London Council, but it was, they took on Thatcherism in every possible way, all the new strategies, and they operated out of County Hall, which faced Parliament, with giant anti-Thatcher slogans painted on the front of the building. They were the thorn in the side of Thatcher, and Thatcher's response was to abolish the GLC, was just to remove a tier of government, which was a disaster for London because it meant no central coordination for any services of any kind. I was politically, it was political motivation, but I got into photography as a result. There was a lot of, I learned practical things, but basically it was we were working around issues of representation.
And what was Photo Co-op?
It was a group of photographers. It had started out entirely voluntary as the Wandsworth Photo Co-op. There was a socialist local newspaper in a part of town that was very mobilized. There's a very strong network. I've heard of people who actually moved to Wandsworth to be part of its kind of socialist community at the time. At the heart of that was a newspaper called Pavement, which I think came out every 2 weeks. It was made by community volunteers, and it was reporting on political actions and events. There were lots of campaigns going in the neighbourhood, all of which progressively failed, incidentally. It was the juggernaut of Thatcher after the victory over the miners, and of course the Falklands War, which made her a national heroine, I guess, became a juggernaut, and everything that we ever worked on, things we were trying to save, hospital, the South London Women's Hospital, the families, all the different groups that we campaigned on behalf of all lost their battles. So it was in the end depressing, but in the early 80s it was really exciting. And I got and some of the photographers. So I was the one non-photographer employee of a group of photographers, had money from the Greater London Council to work on campaigns, get involved with local groups, help them articulate their cause visually. We made laminated panel exhibitions. There was a photo library which supplied pictures to trade unions and health campaigners and a whole range of social causes. Three among six of the photographers who were involved as I first started working there were studying photography at the Polytechnic of Central London, now University of Westminster. Victor Bergin and Simon Watney were the two key characters in that period. Simon Watney particularly, who led the course, and meaning he kind of nurtured us individually as well as taught us. And he's somebody you should talk to, by the way. He's such an interesting man, and I don't know why we're not all talking about him. He was a great writer of the period, and as well as a gay activist. That was the things that they came back from college with, the conversations they were having, motivated me to then attend the same part-time photography degree course at PCL, and somewhere along the way, photography became my life. And one of the things actually about about co-ops was they were quite fashionable in the 70s and into the 80s, but they then became very unfashionable, and people would tend to avoid them, believing being a co-op was, equivalent to incompetence, or they weren't the organization you went to get the job done. So one of the discussions was, do we need to change not only our identity, but our constitution as a as a workers' co-op. And indeed, that's what happened, though it actually happened after I'd left. But before I left, we really worked out what we thought we should be in the future for the long term. And that is still there in the form of Photofusion in Brixton, which is what the Photo Co-op became.
Oh, great. I didn't know for that. And can we speak about your experience at Magnum Photo? So you were the director of the London office in 1990, and you moved to New York 1995, 1998. How did you started, and what did you do?
I'll tell you what it was, actually. Funny enough, in a few hours, I'm going to have a cup of tea with Neil Burgess, who was my boss, my first boss at Magnum, who was the director and who had set up the London office. And he had, prior to that, run a Arts Council funded gallery in Liverpool called Open Eye. And he did, there were this series of conferences about photography that were held, that the Arts Council funded at the time. And I went to a talk by Neil Burgess, at which he compared the experience of working in the free market at Magnum compared to the funded sector at Open Eye. And I think I was persuaded that was a journey I wanted to go on. I honestly, I'd had enough of the politics of funding, which was, every year the values changing and you have to reorient your organization. Not bad things that were wanted from funders, like, this year they wanted you to focus on disability, for example. And I'm not arguing against that, but you were forever sort of swinging around, just getting going in one direction, and then you moved in another. I spent half my life dealing with like application forms. So I wanted to be like, I wanted to go out like Neil did and sell pictures to the magazines, and wanted also to work in a bigger environment than just the Photocop was very much a kind of local project. And I don't really know Magnum. I at that point. The degree, I got a photography degree by then, but what PCL taught you was semiology, Freud, and Marx. So that and how to handle a camera and work in a studio and things like that. So we had no history at all. I had no knowledge about Cartier-Bresson I knew the name Magnum. I knew Alex Webb's work, which I had been very, I came across a book in the Photographer's Gallery bookstore that I absolutely loved, which was Half Light. Is it Half Light, Half Made Worlds? Something like that. So I really didn't go for Magnum. I went for Neil. So I wanted him as my mentor, and I wanted to work for him. And I'd already decided at that point, my next job, because I had no boss up to that point, I wanted a boss who I could learn from. And then I saw a job advertised as his assistant, took a kind of major pay cut and a responsibility cut to go and work with Neil. Ended up selling photographs very enthusiastically. I was like highly competitive, and I was on my bicycle going around, it was the kind of last days of before the big agencies, the Reuters and AP became the kind of sole suppliers of photographs to newspapers other than the ones that they commissioned. So they bought pictures every week. I made part of my approach was basically you couldn't easily make an appointment with people to go in and show pictures, and you weren't allowed into the building without an appointment. So my great skill was getting to the picture desk without being stopped by security and people. So, and there was a kind of routine kind of conversation that happens like, how the fuck did you get in here? And being kind of shouted at initially, but then they bought some pictures of me. So, and I went on to the next place.
The person who bought the picture was press, c'est ça? It was press?
Yeah, it was mainly magazines. But there were lots of sections. even though you could argue that the heyday of the press was earlier, there was more press at that time. The Independent launched, the Correspondent launched. All the press had multiple sections now, and magazines on Saturday, magazines on Sunday. There was a lot of it, and it needed filling. And so, yeah, I was a salesperson. Was the main thing I did.
So you was with all the picture of Magnum photographer, and you move in London with your bicycle to
exactly
towards
my photo bag.
Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, I want to give credit to Suzanne Hodgart, who was long-time picture editor at the Sunday Times magazine. So my first outing, she bought a picture for 400 quid. And that was absolutely thrilling. And I didn't realize until much later that she didn't need it or want it. She just bought it to be supportive of a young man out trying to sell pictures for the first time. And that was a truly sweet as well as very encouraging thing to do. And of course, those were the days where there was money sloshing about in the press. There was, people bought things not just to publish them, but they bought things to protect the other thing that they bought that would have been undermined of this. If they were doing a story on something and there were two photographers who'd done the story, they might buy both photographers' work, even though they were only going to run one, just to prevent somebody else having the
exclusivity. Yeah,
exactly. So, and of course, it was much more. I think that competition was much more intense in Paris, which was really the headquarters of the European press at that point, and obviously the French press itself was extremely, intense, busy, dominant. I mean, it was a fertile time for photography, really. But it, of course, all changed.
And Magnum's headquarters was in France. A branch was in London. So, how many people? In London?
Basically, I went on to... I became the director when Neil Burgess went to New York.
Okay, when he opened the New York office.
No. Magnum started, I think, from the very beginning with a New York and a Paris office.
Okay.
London, everywhere else they had agents. London, there was an agent. I think it was... I don't know exactly what the decision was. There was a group of younger photographers in London who thought they would be better served by having their own office, and they set that up. That was always a kind of a little bit of a thorn in the side of Magnum Paris in a way. So there was some rivalry that went on there. I think there were about 30 people or 40 people employed in Paris and about 10 in London at this time. It was Magnum was quite anarchic in a good way. I mean, it was a brilliant environment in which to learn, sometimes through negative things in terms of some drama you were presented with that you had to find a way through. But partly because there really was no adequate management. There was ideas and there was argument, but there wasn't management. I think it was the best place to learn less about photography than what I was capable of as a human being, if you know what I mean. And there was lots of opportunity too.
So you stayed 5 years in London with Magnum, and you moved to New York.
I spent 1 year. Neil Burgess left. There was a new director in New York. It didn't work out. They'd lost a lot of money. I got asked one day, would I go to New York the next day and take over? And I did a year of commuting, 2 weeks in London, 2 weeks in New York. That was horrible. And then I decided to stay in New York for a further 2 years after that.
And at this point, you were still working more in the commercial.
It was all commercial. I mean, in the sense that Magnum's job was to monetize photographers' work, to come up with stories, to sell stories that they made, to find economic routes. It was the Magnum in Paris had really developed a more cultural market as distinct from the press. And I was involved in that. We did some major projects with the Barbican, for instance, and employed somebody to look after, to help with exhibitions and the cultural development. And it was about business, because I think one of the New York situation that I inherited at the time was one in which the business wasn't smartly cared for. The photographers may have been well looked after in terms of other kinds of services, but there was a real shortage of sales know-how and appetite at the time in what obviously was the biggest market of all, certainly for corporate / advertising work. So it wasn't hard to turn around, actually.
It was?
It wasn't hard to turn around. It wasn't hard to turn a heavily loss-making unit of Magnum into one that was actually profitable. So that's been my role in Magnum, was like I'm and in a tradition that Neil Burgess had kind of carved out, which is to make it work economically.
Yeah, and what you say, it's at the beginning, it was maybe more with magazine, with the press, with some corporate, and maybe step by step more exhibition or more books. C'est ça?
Yes.
The kind of project. So maybe it's at Magnum you started to do some books.
Absolutely.
And to discover maybe the publishing industry.
Yeah. So the first book I worked on was a history of the work of George Roger, which really hadn't been. I mean, his work had been published, but nobody had done a kind of comprehensive survey of his work. He, a Japanese photographer, Hiroji Kubota, came to London about 2 or 3 weeks after I took over as director. He took me out for lunch and said, "You have to do something about George. He's dying. He was unwell at the time and old, and he was deteriorating. He's going to be forgotten if you don't do something." And I think Hiroji himself, partly out of some battle with Henri Cartier-Bresson, Henri had said something about his work or insulted him, and he really wanted to kind of promote George. But George was the British founder of Magnum. He was living quietly, gradually I think he had cancer at the time, gradually fading, if you like. And I thought, absolutely, that's exactly what I should be doing. So, and really, it was a collective enterprise of the photographers in London at the time. Peter Marlowe got involved in editing with George all of his work. I got Phaidon involved, who took the book on, and the Barbican involved, who did the show. There was one moment, in fact, before the Barbican show, we had a smaller version of the show that opened at the Royal Photographic Society in Bath, to which Henri and everybody, John Morris was there. Everybody involved in George's photo life came to that opening, and it was very moving. And George got better. So in order to do this, he got totally motivated by this project. I guess it was about 2 or 3 years' work until the book was out and the Barbican show opened. And there was like 500 pictures in the Barbican show. It was a major project. And he got well to do it. And at the end, and it was like 2 weeks after the Barbican opened, which was really the kind of end of all the work that we'd been doing together, he and his wife Jinx invited us to his home in Kent, And it was a beautiful day, and we sat in the garden and had lunch, and he'd never seemed better. Really, he was like on the best form, and a couple of days later he died in his sleep. So in a way, he'd really stayed alive to do that work, and we sorted out his life's work, and something I'm very proud of, really.
So it was the first book?
That was the first book, and then there were many others, and I did a book with Aperture, in fact, but we, Magnum, decided to package a book, meaning we were making it, editing it, and selling finished copies to Aperture about the history of Israel that was conceived at one. It looked like the Oslo Accords were going to lead to a permanent peace deal and enormous progress. And it was the 50th anniversary of the State of Israel. So it wasn't hard to be positive about the story of Israel at that particular moment. But then while we were working on the book, the first Intifada broke out. It was when, I'm not going to get into the historical details, but the story turned out to be very different and of ongoing conflict. And it was really interesting the way that in Magnum, there were the kind of the earlier, older members, and the ones, of course, who died, like Robert Capa, who'd been real enthusiasts.
Yeah, because this book was not just about photographers, it was about subject, it was about the place, it was about history.
Yeah. So, but the early part of the story is marked by a passion for the new state, let's call it that. There was a real... Chim Seymour had done a lot. Of course, there were many, half of Magnum's early members were East European Jewish emigres to America and France, and who very much identified with the state of Israel as it began. And then the kind of the next generation of photographers really hadn't got any time for it, and there was the wars in Lebanon, and that's what they covered and were interested in. So, like in lots of organizations today, kind of Israel was a controversial topic, let's say, and the book kind of turned out to be awful. It's not a book that I'm proud of. I learned so much. Well, because we had a storyline as we set out, and then the story changed, and it was really difficult to reflect. We could, it was tied to the anniversary. It had to sort of be upbeat, but it couldn't be. And then I think, it was like there was a coherent narrative, and then it just went towards the end and in lots of different directions, and there was no coherent story or position. And I remember having this huge argument with Michael Hoffman, who was the proprietor at Aperture, where he did not like the book. And I think he had good reason to not like the book. Plus, he'd sold it to some Jewish, Israel organizations who wished to celebrate the 50th anniversary, and it wasn't great for a celebration. And the thing he focused on was Martin Parr, that he hated these Martin Parr kind of, I guess they were kind of tourist pictures from Bethlehem, and he wanted them out, and he wanted the ending redone, and that was the last time I saw Michael Hoffman.
And at this time, did you meet Phaidon Press? Did you work with them? Like,
yes.
How did you move to?
You're very well
Magnum?
informed. The George Roger book became the beginning of a working relationship with Phaidon. We did many books with them. I'm looking on my bookshelf here at Magnum Degrees, which was Magnum's 50th anniversary project. I'm sure we did. While I was working at Magnum, we did a dozen books with them, and then, at some point, they offer me a job, like when I'm ready to leave Magnum, let me know. And then I kind of reached a sort of a natural point where, I mean, the great thing about the time I spent at Magnum was it just kept getting better. It kept getting more interesting. And then there was a point where it didn't, or I didn't see that coming. So I jumped ship. Why did I leave?
What did you say? It was difficult, more difficult? Or?
It wasn't more difficult. It was just like there was always a new opportunity on the horizon, and at the tail end, I didn't see what that opportunity was, and the opportunity became to go and do something else. I mean, I worked there about 8 or 9 years, and I've actually come to recognize that I can't do anything for longer than that. That 8, 9, maybe 10 years is the maximum I can focus on one work role, and then I need a change. So I needed a change.
Yeah, so a new chapter.
Yes. So I came back to London, worked for Phaidon, originated a huge number of books, had some real successes. The Martin Parr book of books was my idea that I took to Martin. It took 2 years to persuade him to do that. It was not published while I'd already left by the time it was published. Boring Postcards was also my idea for a book, which was it was a time that there was a lot of investment available for new book projects. It was very intense time, but Phaidon was a little medieval. And it's also I'd gone from a situation where Magnum of actually enormous freedom to one where it was very much controlled by one individual, Richard Schlagman, the proprietor, and there was opportunity in that, and the man was a marketing genius. I think I learned a lot from him. At the same time, I couldn't bear it. I had to get out, and then I started my own thing.
But when you were at Phaidon, it was about photography book, or did you work in other projects?
No, I mean, I was one of the. There were several. Yeah. My job title was editorial director, photography. There were other commissioning editors. We'd all sit round the table, but there was a very disciplined but kind of long-winded process for getting new books off the ground. So once every 2 weeks, I think it was, we'd sit around a round table with Richard all day discussing the books that we thought that should be each of us. So I was in the room as strategies for architecture, contemporary art, etc., were shaped, and that was actually amazing. And many things about how to publish, I guess I learned from Richard.
And what did you do exactly? Did you so you discuss about the books, but did you were in touch with the photographer directly, or with the artist, or with the or did you also write the text, or did you like?
I didn't write anything at that time. I mean, no. The process was you prepare you have something in mind. Obviously, you've got to talk to the artist involved, or artists, or maybe it's a concept that doesn't need. You're going to hire a picture researcher to go and find the photographs. There hadn't really been many photo books at Phaidon other than the ones that I'd already been working on. I mean, Phaidon was a very old publisher, founded in the 30s in Oxford, kind of lost its way in the 1970s, was bought by Richard from the liquidator because he thought it was a brand that he could make work. At that time, he had been buying and selling brands. He bought the Bush radio brand, which was a kind of classic British brand from receivership. I think the story goes, I don't know how true it is, that he kind of asset stripped it, moved the manufacturing to Taiwan, and revived Bush radio. Bought it for nothing, sold it a year later for a lot of money, and then was kind of doing the same thing. Yeah, it's a business guy. Doing the same thing with Phaidon. I think that was the plan, but he got engrossed. He really enjoyed it, and it was his ticket into. So then he had dinner. He could have dinner with David Hockney, and it made him, as I think his personal interests and his business interests coincided, and he stayed for, I don't know how long he stayed before he eventually sold it, but at least 10 years, probably longer. And they hadn't really done photography books. I think they might have bought in for a couple of things from other publishers, but the work with Magnum was the beginning of that. He saw this as a kind of popular market for books, and there was a point where, I mean, when I was employed there, I could commission 10 books in a week. I mean, it was really, I think I actually looked at how many books I actually commissioned. It was like 140 in 2 years, with about 60 of them made and published in that time. So it was kind of frenetic, and there's quite a lot of screaming and shouting one way and another. But yeah, I would go to an artist. I would go to Martin Parr, say, I think we should do this, and this. What do you think? And he said, well, let's do that and that, and let's do it in that order. I mean, and then I propose it. There'd be these very long discussions about possible books. Richard, relied, I think, on other people's opinions at that time, meaning, he'd chair the meetings, but the contemporary art editor was there, the architecture editor was there, the fashion editor was there, and they'd all weigh in on whether they thought such and such a book belonged on the Phaidon list. And it was a good process.
And so in 2000, you started your own publishing house. I
mean, the main thing at the time is I had to get out. And actually, it was on my 40th birthday that I gave my notice. So it was a little bit of like, if I'm going to do my own thing, I got to get on with it. And initially, I wasn't thinking of starting a publisher. I wanted to make books, and I knew how to package books and sell them to publishers. So I thought I was going to develop projects and sell them to publishers. But I hadn't done that for very long before I realized, well, I was working on a particular book, again with Martin Parr. This was work that he had introduced me to. The photographs that John Hines postcard photographers had made of the Butlins holiday camps, that became a book called Our True Intent is All for Your Delight. It was published in France by Textuel. I can't remember what title they gave it. That was a slogan that he used, a sort of misquote of Shakespeare on some of the buildings. The whole story of these holiday camps is extraordinary. It's a post-war story, and these postcard pictures were made in the 1960s, very glamorous and full of people and activity, but they were sort of sets. It was holiday as a kind of set, meaning everything was paper thin and really terribly manufactured, but there was the illusion of glamour. And Martin, actually, I think I'd just finished working at Phaidon, and Martin said, "Hey, you want to come with me to Dublin? Let's go and look at these photographs." And I've never looked at a set of photographs and been unable to breathe, except then, like literally took my breath away. And there were these 5:4 transparencies that were just utterly gorgeous, only ever used up to that point on biscuit tins and as postcards, but these stunning, beautiful, perfectly made large format color transparencies. So that project actually, I mean, it was very successful, not just the book, but we sold prints via a network of galleries in France, America, Britain, elsewhere. And actually the income that project generated enabled me to do many other things. So most of the books that I did as an independent publisher did not break even, which is the case.
I wanted to know, because I know it's kind of difficult to do books economically. I mean.
Yes.
So you say this project with Martin Parr paid, like your
I mean, it certainly paid for many.
Yeah,
I mean, I did have
the
support. I mean, I don't think I had any kind of disasters in terms of things that were lost huge amounts of money, but it was a tricky business. By the way, I set up in publishing with a £10,000 loan from Martin and the same amount from my mum, and that was all the investment that it took. But and I worked from here, where we are now. This was my office, and this house actually. My partner and I bought because we needed to find a way of getting the overhead down as I started out in business, and we had another place which is much smaller in a much more fashionable part of town. We found we could swap it for a big house, and we rented rooms out, which is how I was really able to get that going. But yes,
and you work with your partner?
He has been involved at different times. I mean, he's always been helpful, and he would do. Whenever I used to take booths at Frankfurt Book Fair, and he would be on the booth engaging people, and he's brilliant with people. And he's not really an art photo guy, but he is great with people and very supportive of me. So yeah, he was around throughout.
Yeah, because most of the time when in a couple someone is independent, the other people helps the other a lot. So I think it's really interesting also to say also sometimes thank you to the other people who are maybe in the shadow, but most of the time. It's thanks to a lot of people who are maybe not working in art, but most of the time, it's thanks to the. Yeah,
well, I was always reliant on Tony, kind of Martin, in the sense that, as I've just described, as somebody who pointed me to things and was just helpful in, and I think in a way that my publishing activities, certainly in the beginning, were quite characterized by my relationship with Martin. Yeah, it was good. And I was just carrying on making books and making that work until Aperture called.
Can we speak about that? So you moved back again to New York?
Leslie Martin gave me a call. I think it was 2008. Their then director had, I think, been let go. I mean, Aperture was really shaped by Michael Hoffman. I mean, it was founded before that by Minor White, and Michael was Minor White's assistant. But it was really Michael who built it as a business enterprise, and whose artistic taste and appetites characterized it, I guess, through that period. And it was a true publisher, and he died suddenly of an illness without having really set up any kind of plan for the organization after he was gone, where there was then a succession of, basically there was 10 years where I think 4 directors were in place, but none of them lasted more than 18 months, and it's not an uncommon thing for an organization that's really shaped by one person, finding its way through that, the period after he's gone. And so I got approached. I knew Aperture was kind of chaotic, and I said, I was happy doing my thing in London, and I wasn't interested, and I said so. And then I was on holiday with Tony. We were in Costa Rica on this kind of cottage, postmodern cottage on the beach. It was the most beautiful place we've ever stayed, I think, in the jungle, but looking out on a beach and nobody else around. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, that's my job. That's the job I want to do. And I think that was because it's because of essentially social media, or it's beginning the way the media was changing. I was too small to engage. I wasn't going to be able to kind of grow, but Aperture was this legacy brand in the States. I thought I could make that work and take advantage of the new opportunities in media. And I raced to put my, a CV together and stuff. And I didn't get a look in that time. I think maybe they'd already chosen somebody, but they chose Juan Garcia de Orteza, who was once the Mexican cultural attaché to the United States, but it also had a background in photography and publishing, and was a really, really wonderful man, but a bit chaotic. And anyway, he didn't last. And the job came up again 18 months later, and that time I kind of went for it from the beginning, knowing that's what I wanted to do.
Oh, was it? And the start,
wonderful.
because as you said, some people tried, but it was not easy to find your place, or maybe. So, how was the beginning when you started to work at Aperture? I think
things had gotten so bad that I could do anything, and also, I mean, so they were considering. There were kind of reports produced, and they were sitting on the table as I was being interviewed. Proposals to stop publishing the magazine and to stop publishing books, and my platform was no, don't. This is in books. It was actually the most imaginative period. It was the time where the New York Art Book Fair and the other book. I mean, it was a very fertile moment for the photo book. And yes, often you needed subsidy to make things, but Aperture was set up as a not-for-profit, and that should have been easier to raise money, and it was towards particular projects. And then on the magazine, that was more of a gamble in a way. But I thought that without a physical magazine, it would just be another... I mean, there were so many online, impermanent kind of content relayers. I thought there was a way. So with the magazine, we doubled its price, made it much more luxurious, brought it back to having themes, which had been what it had done at a point in the past, and then that wasn't the plan initially, but then really took on social justice as a big overriding theme, which was
something that was really important for you, I think.
Yes.
I think.
Well, I mean,
from the beginning of your career, it was.
Well, yes, it's funny because I guess I got into photography because of interest in issues in politics. I'd become interested in, let's call it, the art of photography, and obviously had a kind of particular taste and appetite. But I, along the way, definitely had become less political. But then the times in the States in that period, it was the emergence of Black Lives Matter and the documentation of the recognition that the racism that white people, or a lot of white people, ignorantly assumed was history, was more than alive and well, and photography was revealing that in a way, in the most dramatic way. And it was when we sat around as a kind of staff group to discuss how we should respond to Black Lives Matter. And Trump was on the wings as well. That we as a staff group came to a conclusion that we need to engage far more seriously with a more diverse group of artists, and we need to change. And
maybe in the States, but it's with my French point of view, but maybe they are more in advance. In France, we had Black Lives Matter, but I think not as big. I think in the States it was maybe bigger. So maybe you were also like in a really in the space, like in the maybe if you was in London at this time, maybe it
wouldn't have been the
same
thing.
Yeah.
I agree, and it was actually So really, we that I would say there was one overriding theme to the work that we were doing at Aperture when I arrived, which is what has photography become? I mean, Instagram had just started, or what is photography becoming? There was this movement around photographers making sculptural objects. We did a book called Photography is Magic that's by Charlotte Cotton. It was really kind of giving shape to that movement in photography. There was a lot of work that was exploring photography ontologically, if you know what I mean, thinking about what the medium is. And I think that was relevant at that moment. But the landscape of photography became kind of much more settled by about 2013, I think. A lot of those questions were less interesting. They'd been answered 2013, 2014, which is when Black Lives Matter and Trump surfaced and the politics of America became a lot more feisty. It changed New York completely. When I got there, I was briefed, just don't talk politics with any of our patrons. It's too volatile. You'll get into trouble, and so just avoid the topic. And then Trump kind of changed that because he really brought New Yorkers together. So the kind of, let's call them the soft right with the left joined forces. Everybody hated Trump enormously, and it also, but it wasn't just that it was the right thing to do to create platforms for a more diverse photography or work towards a more diverse photography. It was also where the grant support, the growth was possible. So and even then, for a long time, the books didn't always sell that well. But I remember after George Floyd died and during COVID and that moment of extreme volatility in London, these books, which were a lot of them were about Black American experience, one way and another, which had been, one copy on the shelves at the back. Suddenly they were all on the tables at the front. We did really well in the end, and the year we did best in was 2020. During COVID, we'd actually just reorganized our distribution systems to be much better at selling books direct. I mean, we built the audience online, we built the delivery mechanisms. There was one day during COVID, early on, where I think we had a sale or some promotion, but we took 1,400 orders in a day, and all of which, of course, was being processed outside by now a better distribution infrastructure. It's taken a long time to kind of get there, but it was, oddly, COVID helped everyone see how that new model for the organization made sense.
I read a sentence you say. It's typically a museum creates an exhibition while publishing a catalog to support it. And at Aperture, we work the other way around.
Yes.
So I really like this sentence. Can you explain more?
Well, I think we as publishers. I mean, I'm now excluding the magazine. Although the magazine was this is how the kind of pipeline worked. The magazine was a place where we could work with artists we hadn't worked with before, work with writers we hadn't worked before, explore ideas that were unfamiliar to us. We used guest editors on topics that we didn't have expertise, etc. And a lot of that filtered then into the book program. So quite often threads of books would come from topics that we'd taken on in the magazine. Like the first kind of social issues, social justice topic that we took on was an issue of the magazine called Queer. And I do remember before it came out, going to a board meeting and presenting the trustees, like, this is where we're going, fasten your seatbelts. We're taking this on, not just the queer issue, but social issues generally. And they were tremendously supportive. I mean, there was one guy in the room, very old guy who sadly died, who said, ugh, when he saw that. But he actually came round and was the biggest supporter of what we took on there. No, I think we were just ahead of the curve, and I mean, like, too late, but not completely too late, if you know what I mean. I mean, Aperture had really been a kind of very white organization, like many in photography, hadn't really ever initiated much to change that. In any case,
yes, I think it's this point. I think it's more a global situation. It starts from school, like, so maybe there are some jobs who are less accessible in museums or in culture world. At least in France, we can't say it's a diverse environment. Yeah, so maybe it starts before the.
Well, that really became our mission as an organization. We were publishers, so we'd identify a project we thought should be a book. I mean, we thought like publishers, but then we thought about how to materialize that work. You know, it's almost an extension of how do you promote the book. Well, the best thing is to have everybody talking about an exhibition and at a venue where lots of people will buy the book like they would buy a catalogue after the show, etc. So it was we start with thinking of a book and then explore other ways to realize the project. We had a very established kind of exhibition touring framework at Aperture. So we would create shows for our gallery, and then the ones that for which there was demand, then tour them. And the most successful of those, there was a bit. It accounted for only a tiny part of the organization's economics. Maybe 10% of our income came from exhibition hire. But yeah, that's what just differentiated us from a museum who would think about the show and then think about what kind of supporting.
And the rest of the income is just books and magazines?
Well, about a third of our income came from sponsorships and grants. And when I say grants, in the American context, that's actually mostly individual gifts. So... And that is, by the way, one of the great things about New York. I mean, it terrified me a little before I went there, thinking, how am I going to function in that environment of rich people and, philanthropy and galas and all that. But it turned out it was brilliant, and I had a lot of fun, and I loved the people that I worked with, and and it's a great thing that in New York, if you are successful, you have an obligation to invest money back into whether it's social causes or artistic causes. And so in a way that nothing comparable, I mean, it's gradually moving in that direction here, but it's not, we don't have the same tax benefits that the Americans have, and I think it's not a common. It's not how the French art scene works. so much, although perhaps that's changing fast too.
No, not yet, no. But so you said 10% exhibition, 30% grants and sponsors.
Yes,
so
and the remaining would be book and magazine sales.
So you left Magnum in 2021.
Yeah, no, I left Aperture in 2021.
Aperture.
Yeah.
So now you are back in London, and did you have some current project? Did you?
I'm working on a few things. I mean, for the first time in my career, I moved without a plan, other than I would reach that 10-year mark. I mean, I knew I needed a change, and we had to recuperate our lives, my partner and I, in London, and we'd rented this house out, and we had stuff stored all over the place. We just put our lives back together, but I also wanted to get back. I wanted to leave Aperture in time to have another chapter to my career. And then I did actually get ill, which kind of affected things. I mean, I'm fine now.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm working on a few projects. That's it.
Still books?
Yeah, they're going to be books. I mean, I did do a couple of books, and now I'm working on some books.
Drawing from your expertise, what notable advancements have you seen in photography since you started your role as a curator and publisher? It's a really big question, but do you have some things when I say that will come to your mind?
Well, the first thing is social media. I mean, I started in photography before email. So we had telex machines to communicate between the offices, and we called each other on the phone. So a lot has happened. I remember a debate at the photo co-op before that as to whether we should buy a computer. So a lot has happened in the period that I've been involved in photography and social media. Or just the whole distribution of pictures that the internet and smartphones permits has been utterly transformative, of awareness of what the person down the road or in the next country is doing as well. Because I remember in London we used to talk about how important it was to connect with photography in Europe, but the only way to do that was to get on a plane and go to Paris or Vienna or wherever it was, Berlin, and go see what everybody was doing, because there was no media that shared that. You were quite isolated, and basically it was a world in which you did things with people you could meet in person in your area. And that became, that utterly changed as a result of the facility of the web.
Yeah. So
and now it's a tyranny.
Yeah. It's
I mean, it was so, there was a period where it was really exciting, the opportunities that it created. Now I'm not so sure, but not my problem today. I'm in my own little world. I'm back nearer how I began, working with the people I like to work with, who I can meet with, and of course, you need social media for marketing and so on. But I'm moving the opposite direction to the one. I went to work at Aperture because I was too small to be able to deal with the opportunities in this emerging world. Now I've given up that emerging world, and I'm quite happy to be super small.
Finally, my question is in two parts. What advice would you give to those aspiring to pursue careers as curators and book publisher, based on your own experience, and advice for people who want to work with curators or book publisher like you, like it's not a big question. It's like, do you have some little advice, like practical, well, things to do or not to do? Yeah.
I would say that the thing that, I mean, I've always done my best work when I'm really clear about the purpose of it. So I'm, and even as an editor, I think that my work as an editor has been more about clarifying the purpose of a project, then the pictures choose themselves. Purpose and narrative. It's not. I'm less interested in should it be that picture or that picture. I'm more interested. What is the story? What is the purpose of this work? And that's the role I've tended to play with photographers to help clarify those things. And I would say, most of us aren't so lucky that we know what we're doing all the time. But when you do know, when the ideology, the delivery, when the practice is all, when it is refined, worked out, and you are driven, then nothing can stop you. If you know what I mean. I think those are the conditions in which you do good work, and it will get through.
Yeah, because it's a difficult world.
Yes.
It's a difficult job.
I mean, it's so competitive and busy.
So you need to be really...
Yes. So have clarity, find clarity. But that's for photographers and for curators, I suspect. No, I don't know. I mean, I be ready for opportunity, because I would say my career has definitely been marked by being ready for the opportunities when they arose. Like, I thought about them and I had worked out what I would do with them, if you like, and opportunities always arise. But that's not very smart. I haven't got any great advice for anybody. The world's changed so much. I don't know, even in the 3 years since I've been back in the UK, since working at Aperture, I mean, it feels like I'm not trying to understand it all anymore. I mean, I'm engaged with the projects that I'm engaged with, but I'm not trying to have a view on the whole scene, which I guess I used to.
For your experience, for your career, we can have some insight, and I think it can inspire a lot of people. So thank you, Chris, for your time.
Thank you for being interested.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Les Voix de la Photo. In the notes of this episode, you will find a sign-up link to receive Les Voix de la Photo newsletter. Sorry, it's in French, at least for now. Every 2 weeks, you will get a summary of the latest episode, exclusive content, my recommendation for reading, exhibitions or conferences, and sometimes even gifts. Also, to help spread the word about the podcast, I'll invite you to leave a comment and 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you want to share your thoughts, suggest people you would like to hear, or learn more, you can follow me on social media, on Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook. See you soon!